Today marks 5 years since the death of former President Nelson Mandela. The Nelson Mandela Foundation and eNCA are bringing you a discussion titled Mandela's Death, Who Planned It? It'll look at how the media covered Madiba's death in December 2013. My co-anchor, Vuyo Mvoko, is at the foundation. He joins me live. Vuyo, good evening. I suppose in both our memories, because we covered the days leading up to Madiba's death extensively, the work that news organizations put into it certainly set the tone for how it would be covered when he did leave South Africans.
Indeed, Kathy, and that's what the foundation is trying to explore through the discussions that are going to take place here this evening. Because South Africans would have seen what they saw on television, read what they read from newspapers and magazines, and would have listened to whatever the radio stations gave them. So what the foundation is trying to do this evening is to give South Africans a sense of what actually went into the planning, and I suppose that has wider implications in that this is what we as the media do on a daily basis. But on a day like that one when Mandela died, what actually went into the planning that would have obviously preceded that particular day? What actually happened on the day? How much of it was as a result of planning, but how much of it was spontaneity because of what had happened as people were beginning to react to what had actually happened on the day, which was the death of Nelson Mandela, and subsequently on the days that followed, what informed the kind of coverage that we got, and of course what are the lessons to learn from the things that we did well, and from the things, of course, that didn't go quite the way that many people, including those who planned, sort of got things. So that is going to be one part of the conversations. So the foundation has invited all the people or many people who were central to how the various newsrooms across the media planned for and actually executed whatever it was that they planned. Now, the second part of the conversation is going to be about reconciliation. Today being a day, of course, to commemorate or to look back at national reconciliation, as you referred to it in your introduction. Something that was very close to Nelson Mandela. And 5 years on, the Nelson Mandela Foundation believes that the topic is just as relevant, if not more relevant, than it was perhaps when Nelson Mandela was still alive. You'll recall, of course, Kathy, from a conversation that you had with Njabulo Ndebele of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. What he told you is how or why the foundation felt that that issue too should actually be looked into on a day we are commemorating his death 5 years on. And here's what he told you when you had that conversation with him.
Polarization happens partly through lack of deep communication. And so without depth of communication, you resort to sloganeering and the throwing of insults in the public domain, and the fact that people then hold on to prejudices that they have been ingrained in them over a long period of time. So the way to deal with prejudice is not to counter prejudice. It is actually to deal with why someone is prejudiced and the causes of it. So I think that it's Madiba's values become critical where the society becomes polarized. He always talked about reconciliation. And I've once told a story of how when I was a child, you would be driving from one town to another to visiting friends, and you come back at night, the car is stopped, and your father in front of your eyes, is humiliated by the police, asking him all sorts of questions. You look at your father, he knows that you're looking at him. He can't be the authority figure at that particular moment, and he was wondering what now you think of him. I think that was a sort of brutalizing conduct on the part of the state system for the white racism. But I've always said, many years later, under the influence of thinkers like Madiba, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, that I have a duty to espouse a different value system, never to humiliate anyone in that kind of way.
Vuyo, of course, this talk of reconciliation and the polarization of society leads to the media to a large extent, because many journalists have in fact found themselves in the crossfire between the politics of the day. So are you expecting that going forward then there would be perhaps a stronger role from the foundation, as we saw them meet with the EFF, I think it was 2 weeks ago, issuing a statement about how they want to consult with political parties across the board before the elections?
Well, Kathy, we in the media are the people who convey, whether it's people's attitudes towards the question of race or anything for that matter. We are the people who tell broader, who reflect to broader society the things that happen in corners where the rest of South Africans aren't to be found. So from whatever conversation we're going to have here this evening on how the media reflected the death of Nelson Mandela, what are the lessons to learn from there? And as we grapple with the issue of racism, prejudice, and other forms of prejudice, what are the lessons to learn from what we have done in the past? And how can we improve to make sure that, one, issues like reconciliation do take a center stage, but also when we reflect them in a balanced way where perhaps we're not influenced by things that shouldn't be influencing us, or where we are, of course, prepared, willing and ready to admit to our own prejudices, perhaps, and the role that they play in the messages we convey, wittingly or not, to the South African population.
All right. Well, it's certainly going to be interesting to hear from those voices, and I understand Mac Maharaj is going to be one of those on the panel. And you'd remember that at the time, he was the one who had to explain to journalists what was going on. The phrase critically stable comes to mind in the days leading up to Madiba's departure. So that was my co-anchor, Vuyo Mvoko.